Still, Christianity says you're saved by grace. Nobody else says that. And you know what that means? Christianity will continue to make sense to more and more people, socially, emotionally, culturally, and rationally. Now, Jed's going to come up here and tell you how to ask me questions so that I can hear them.
Let's thank Timothy Keller for that. You may not want to be called an expert, but I will say that you have an amazing mind. And even you will admit that you have a good memory, right? Yeah, okay, good. Because that was amazing. That was really, really cool. I didn't catch all of it, but thankfully, you just wrote a new book that came out last week, right? And there's still copies back there, I hope? I hope. I only had the bookstore get 100, so they may be gone by the time you go back there. But if not, you can at least borrow one from somebody who bought it and take a picture of the table of contents, because I noticed when I looked at the table of contents that the 6 things you mentioned are right there in the table of contents. So, they're spoilers. I liked how you wrote that because it spoils it, but it's easy to see. So what we're going to do now is, as Dr. Keller said, we have half the time for questions, which is great because I know there's lots of questions here. People have questions. So I've got some runners here. Come on over here. These people are related to me. And they're going to go in the first, second, and third aisle with microphones. And they're just going to look for people who have their hands up high and are sitting quietly with their bottoms on the seat, right? Isn't that how we do that? No, just kidding. Then I'm just going to turn the mic over to Dr. Keller so that he can answer those questions. Thank you again. Let's give him another round of applause.
And since Jed brought the subject up, that was very fast. I mean, I know it sounds smart when you talk fast, but that's not necessarily the same thing. Smart, fast, not the same. Anyway, but I wrote 2 books that would cover the material you just heard. The case that Christianity makes emotional and cultural sense is in a book I just put out called Making Sense of God. The argument that Christianity, that there's a rational sense, makes rational sense, there's a rational case, that was in an older book called The Reason for God. So if you actually want to say emotional, cultural sense, how do we know that? Making sense of God, say sense, and what's the rational, kind of more traditional rational case? Reason for God. But now, if you got a question, raise a hand and a person will make you audible. So whoever speaks first, stand up too, and then I can sort of see you sort of.
In C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, he responds to the problem of evil, saying that it's more God gave us free will, and so we have that choice. And in your speech, you talked more about that we don't understand how God's working. What do you think of the free will in response to the problem of evil?
Yeah, you mean, so you're saying in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis uses the free will argument to try to explain suffering.
Yes.
He says that God doesn't, okay. Yeah, now, but some of you know, by the way, the free will argument basically says the reason God allows suffering is that he wants to give us free will, so much of what we do here causes the suffering because we have war and we do all these awful things, and therefore God could stop it, but he wants to give us free will, free choice. That's what C.S. Lewis says. Some of you know I love C.S. Lewis a lot. I've never been convinced by that argument at all. So here's the reason. There's 2 reasons why. First of all, there's too much evil that isn't a result of our free will. You know, it's just volcanoes. Remember Mount Vesuvius, Pompeii? How was that, you know, how was that does God say, well, I got to let them have free will? I don't see how the volcano is part of that. And I got to say this. Listen, I know you're going to say I'm putting God on the hook. Look, when it comes to suffering, because Christianity is the only religion that says that God came to earth and experienced suffering, I think there is that has got to mean you're not in, even Albert Camus, who wasn't a Christian, said the idea that God has suffered means that Christianity can say God understands. That doesn't answer all the questions. However, I'm still going to say this. If I see a child my grandchild, swinging on the swing too much, and I know if she falls off, she's gonna crack her skull open and have to go to the hospital. I'm not going to say, well, I wouldn't want to violate her free will. I would say, no, I'm going to violate her free will and save her life. And so God must have reasons for allowing evil and suffering that we can't know. I'm sure they're good reasons because he's greater than me, and the cross proves that he loves me. And therefore, he's greater than me, the cross proves he loves me, therefore I trust him. But I actually always thought that C.S. Lewis's effort to give an answer there fell flat. Somebody else.
Excuse me, how do you answer the objection that I have no need to repent because I don't believe that sin exists?
Okay, no, wait. The first part I got the last part. The first part of your sentence again?
How do you answer the objection that I have no need to repent because sin does not even exist?
Okay, now I got it. It's a great question. By the way, you need to know that if somebody asks me a question like this and it's not in a big room like this, I almost always don't give an answer. I'd rather find out where the question's coming from. Very often, there's a question behind the question. So if somebody says this, I'm not sure where they're coming from, but here's what I would probably do. I would say, let me ask you this. Imagine that there was an invisible, you don't see it, but there's a recorder around your neck, and it's invisible, and it's recording some things you say in life. It only records when you say to somebody else, you ought to live like this, or you shouldn't have done that, or you should be doing this. So only when you tell other people how they ought to live or how they ought not to live does this recorder record. And at the end of your life, if we took that recorder off and just played it, here's my question. This is what I would say. Do you believe you would have lived up to your own standards for other people? Let's not talk about whether there's a divine law or God or anything like that. Do you believe you would even have lived up to your own standards? Now, if the person says absolutely, that person's probably under the age of 25. Did I just say that on a college campus? I will be never invited back. But anyway, I think most people would say, okay, I see that. And I said, so you do need to repent because you don't live up even to your own standards, even if we don't posit some divine standards. And so I would say that, I also would say that I almost virtually every culture, every religion, to some degree or another, believes that being able to say, I'm sorry, to admit where you're wrong, is a virtue. And so I would say, I don't think I have to argue with you as a Christian. I could make a pretty good case that you do sin, you don't live up even to your own standards, and that there's almost a consensus out there in various cultures that you should be a person who knows how to repent. That's how I'd go like that. Somebody else.
Hi, thank you. How can I, as a black woman, defend my faith as a Christian when I'm having certain conversations with family and friends who say this culture that we call Christianity was kind of forced upon our ancestors who were taken out of their home in Africa and forced by slave masters who kind of used the faith to justify slavery?
That's great. That's great. Actually, if I'd had a chance, excuse me. Yeah. This actually touches a little bit. Remember I said there were 6 things we can't live without, and one of them was justice. And so I didn't get there, so this helps me get there a little bit. For a moment, let me not talk about that historical issue. But after 9/11, almost every day in the week or two afterwards in New York, it was quite an experience to be there. We were there. And almost every day, I was reading Another article saying this is what's wrong with religion. You know, religion caused this. By the way, when I was growing up, the people who were trying to bomb us were atheistic communists. Today, the people who are trying to bomb us are very conservative religious people. And that is a lot, it's a big reason why the culture has changed in its attitude toward religion. Religion used to be something that was going to defend us against tyranny, and now it seems like religion might be on the side of tyranny. And so I was reading all these articles saying, this is what's wrong with fundamentalism, this is what's wrong with fundamentalism. And one day, my wife, Kathy, I was reading her another op-ed piece. I don't know how she puts up with it. And finally, she says, no, it's not fundamentalism that creates oppression and violence. It depends on what your fundamental is. And they said, have you ever seen an Amish terrorist? And because, see, what the Amish have, they have a grip on this. At the heart of our religion is a man dying for his enemies, a man who didn't pay back, a man who was a victim of injustice. And so if you see a man who's the victim of injustice and he triumphs over it, but he doesn't triumph over it just by destroying his enemies, but by dying for his enemies, forgiving his enemies, overcoming them with love, all that stuff, can Christians nevertheless, in the name of Christianity, still be oppressors? Yeah, but in spite of the heart of the religion, not because of it. So what it means, even though Christians have used, in the name of Christ, found biblical reasons to oppress people, the heart of Christianity is there just poking up at them, and it's going to explode in their chest at some point and take them out. I think one of the most astounding things about, and by the way, there has been a lot of good writing about